The young gentleman who competed in Melbourne, when was that? Early this year, had a muscle condition apparently, and just because he cut too much weight leading into it as an amateur, which again, not a fan of, unfortunately passed away after his bout. But the title didn't read that. The title said MMA fighter dies after bout.
Welcome to It's Not About the Fight. I'm Ross Cameron, martial artist, coach, and lifelong student of combat sports. I've had the privilege of being able to work with some of the best in the industry, UFC champions, world-class jiu-jitsu competitors, and elite martial artists from all over the world. Now I'm bringing those lessons to you. Let's get to work. Welcome to It's Not About the Fight. Today we're lucky to be joined by a veteran of MMA, Mr. Peter Hickmott, one of the most respected MMA officials and referees in Australia, with years of experience inside the octagon and leading Mixed Martial Arts Australasia. Peter brings a unique perspective on fighters' safety, officiating and standards, and the development of MMA across Australia. Welcome aboard, Pete.
Very good. Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having us on.
So, Pete, a couple of questions. Can you tell us how you got involved in martial arts and what led you through to becoming a referee?
Like getting involved in martial arts, that started back in 1980, I think. Yeah, it'd be 1985, and just like any other skinny little kid growing up, getting, what's the word these days? I like to often bullied. But anyway, getting picked on at school, I think that word bullying gets used a bit too frequently these days. But anyway, I've got 3 older brothers. I was the youngest one. So started doing karate at the Toowoomba PCYC back in 1985 or 86 and just kept going from there. Started karate, and then in my hometown of Helidon, a guy started up a Taekwondo class. And then saved driving up and down the range 2 or 3 times a week. We went along to Taekwondo, and I continued from there. Got my black belt in 1990 as a 16-year-old. Just haven't stopped. Kept going.
I know the feeling.
Yes.
So what was your path from your first steps in martial arts to refereeing into the UFC? How did all that lay out?
Mate, I think I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So I started, obviously, karate and Taekwondo, and then in 1995 or 96, we met a gentleman by the name of Vincent Perry. I went along and did this new ground fighting thing, which we now commonly know as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So Vince, being a student of John Wills, and was starting to spread the word for that. So we went along to this and just fell for it. There was myself and a couple other mates, very heavily into the stand-up striking with Taekwondo, and this ground game just brought a new element to it. So with regards to the refereeing side of things, I'd always done and been involved in officiating in most sports. But with martial arts, that started, around about the same time with my Taekwondo club. We went down to Sydney to take the team down there for the national titles. As I was the head coach at the club, it was my position to be a judge or a referee. So I just started from there. So that was back then. As the sport evolved and we got involved into mixed martial arts, my first officiating gig was at the local competition up here, King of the Mountain. We needed a referee. I just happened to be it. So I just stepped in the ring at that point because we weren't using a cage. Got in the ring, started there and went for it. And then my first official position as a referee was with Warriors Realm. Shane Barmer asked me to come down and help him out. And mate, I think I was probably blessed in that period of time where we had great referees like Cameron Quinn and Dunstan, just to name a couple guys that I was working with at that point. So I got to learn from those guys how they were moving about. And then got in contact with Steve Percival. Obviously, Steve based in New South Wales and Sydney, and he rang me one day and said, mate, the UFC's coming to Sydney. Do you want to be a part of it? Hell yeah. But the only problem at that point was that obviously Queensland didn't have, and still doesn't have, a government sanctioning body. So I tried to register with the New South Wales Combat Sport Commission at that point and wasn't able to get the application through in time. So that was when UFC was at 110, I think, first came to Australia. So I missed out on that just by poor timing, I guess, at that point. But persevered. Smashers came to Queensland, so I got to judge on that down the Gold Coast, and then judged the 2 Brisbane fight night thing, UFC fight nights. And then got a phone call a little bit after that again from Steve, just saying, mate, UFC's going to Auckland in June. Do you want to be a part of it? I said, yeah, I'll go to Auckland, no dramas. And then
I remember that. You took a point off somebody.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's what you get for elbowing people in the back of the head. Deshaun Johnson against Jake Matthews. So, and then his next part of his conversation was, no, you're going over to referee. Right. Okay. And mate, and that's where it started, and away we went.
So most fans don't understand the pressure and all the technicalities that go into being a referee in the cage.
Mm.
What's going through your mind when you step in there, and what are you looking for?
First thing I do, and I've been doing it for quite a while now, I suppose it sort of falls back on a Thai boxing background when I sit through the cages. I just want to clear my mind. So most people know me as a bit of a larrikin outside the cage. But I actually had some friends come down and watch me referee at one of the Eternal shows down at it was at the Gold Coast, and they said, you're a completely different person when you pull those gloves on. Thought about it for a second. Okay, yeah, fair enough. But for me, when I get into the cage, you'll see me now. I get in there, I'll just give myself a little prayer, bang on the cage a couple of times, step in. That's me clearing my mind from whatever's happened, whether it was the fight before or through the day if it's the first fight, because my role then is to concentrate on what's happening in that cage at that point in time. When we say what we've got to look for, mate, there's a number of things that can happen in like a split of a second. So we're watching, obviously, where the fighters are moving, where they're striking, how they're striking. We've got to be looking at their appearance, how are they reacting to strikes that are coming at them, how they're counter-attacking, if they're playing by the rules, obviously. Things like fingers in the gloves, grabbing the shorts, toes and fingers through the cage. So there's a lot of activity going on in that point in time. And probably the one downside that, as an MMA referee, you don't have the gift of the 8-second count. So we need to make sure that when we make that call, we're making the right call at the right time, because we can't give them an 8 count to say, right, okay, well, maybe I didn't give you enough chance to fight back. An MMA referee, when they step in to stop a fight, we're stopping the fight. But we've always got that, and we always hear the story of the one punch too early or one punch too late. I'd rather be, in my team know, we would rather be the one punch too early, but we've got to make sure we've given that athlete every opportunity that they can to get back into the fight.
A lot of people don't. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that the referee is in there for fighters' safety, not just to make sure that it's a fair fight, but for fighters' safety to make sure that they can turn up to work on Monday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and people don't understand that you're not there as a fan. You're not there watching the fight. You're actually watching what's happening to predict where you need to be and what needs to happen next.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably one thing that is the difference between a good referee and a really good referee, is that the prediction of knowing the fight game enough to say, okay, well, I can see this guy's moving to his right, so I've got to get to a better position as a referee. So I always say to my guys when I'm coaching, put yourself in the biggest part of the cage, but make sure you can still see what's going on. A lot of times, a lot of refs, and even at the top level now, when I go and watch the UFC, I'm not so much watching the fighters as such, but I'm watching where the referees go.
Yep. We've all, as referees, we've all been caught in the wrong spot at the wrong time. However, you want to limit that as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And that just comes from experience. Look, and I've been lucky enough. I think I first started reffing that was either 2004 or 2005. So I've had the best part of 20 years doing it. And at that point in time, in that early part of my officiating, I was still competing. We've had to, and obviously now to make it as completely impartial as possible, is that we can't be having guys who are going to be refereeing or judging have competitors on that same, teammates on that same card. We've got to draw the line and say, right, well, you've got a fighter on there tonight. I can't have you on there.
Yeah,
So,
it's interesting. Like, we've been in the game for forever, and back in the old days, you had to have guys stepping up to do judging, and that had guys on the card because there wasn't enough judges and referees and all the rest of it around.
yeah, exactly.
But now we're following best practices and doing all those things. Where are we getting our information from? Where do we accept our best practices from?
I think with that, we've got to look at the best event that's happening, which is obviously worldwide now, the UFC. So with MMA Australasia and a lot of the Australian federation groups anyway, base their rule sets on the unified rules. So best practices in that is obviously train with Mark Goddard, work with Herb Dean, work with John McCarthy. So there's probably 3 of the best refs in the world that I've had the chance to work with, and learn from them. And then from my point of view, it's what I learned from those guys that I can then pass down to, I'll pass on to my team.
And I know that MMA organises training of officials and all the rest of it, which is almost unusual that the organisations there supporting these guys and giving them the opportunity to learn and having staggered progression through, so they have time learning how to referee and say lockdown, and then they go on to beat down, and then they can start stepping up to the bigger shows. So
yeah, absolutely, and our team knows that. I'm probably lucky again in that I've got a great core team around me. So Thomas Churchill, Phil Cassidy, Claire Fry, Chris Hay, AJ Perry, those guys are now forming the core of our group. And then we've got the new kids coming on that have gone through the course and they want to get the experience and they want to become a part of it. So just going back to that, separating what we were saying before, and I was doing it up until not that long ago where I'd have guys fighting on, say, a nitro, where I'd have to step out the fight before so that I could go and get the guys warmed up. Once they finish fighting, then I'm back in the cage refereeing. So we've had to stop doing that because that then just has a bit of a conflict of interest. And same thing where we've got coaches who are coaching their fight of this fight, the next fight they're sitting cage side judging. The hardest part is getting enough people trained in the system and with enough knowledge to say, yes, I'm confident in you that you can go to this next stage. So you're right. So the grading system that we're using, they have been using for a long time, has been submission wrestling tournaments where, example, Lockdown, where they come along, they do their sitting down cage side judging for a start, just getting to learn the sport without the strikes. Then from there, they can move up to being a referee in the cage. So then they can start getting themselves positioned correctly. And then going on to, so it's like aftershock, XFCs, those sort of things where we can gradually build them up to a point where they've got enough confidence in themselves that they can say, yes, I can step into the cage and do this. Or I can, from my position, from the head official, go, look, I need you to do a bit more work on this side and at that level before I can put you in on the next side. And there's like the guys are all, and girls, I've still got some great ladies in the team as well. They've all got the ambition that some of them just want to be a judge. They don't want to be a ref. Too much pressure. Don't want to have that responsibility. So some of them want to be a judge. So my point for them is, okay, if that's what you want to be, then you need to make sure that you're the most consistent and competent that you can possibly be on the good end. Don't be consistent and competent on the shit end. That doesn't come out well, because even at amateur events, we've still got professional teams there, and those coaches have an expectation.
Yeah, and part of your job is teaching these guys how to deal with that bias, and that if a certain coach doesn't like a decision, how they're going to handle that and all those things. And that's hard to do, to keep everyone's level-headed in those situations, because we all know that we're hotheads.
Really? Yeah, you're right, mate. And that's, I suppose, again, that comes back to having someone that's been around the industry for a long time. Like a lot of the coaches I'm reasonably good mates with, I'd call most of them all friends. So they know that if there's something that isn't right, they can come and talk to me about it. And I can say, yeah, look, I agree with you on that one. Let me work on it. We can't change this one. That's the reason why we have an amateur show. Absolute grassroots. In reality, if a coach is coming in there with the ambition that their fighter is going to be the best and they're going to have a 10-0 record as an amateur before they move into the pros, they're coming in with the wrong attitude. And I've always said, when I was coaching, for the first 2 or 3 fights, I don't care what the outcome is. Firstly, I want you to be safe. Secondly, if you win, that's great. But thirdly, if you lose, that's fine. That then gives me, from a coaching point of view, the knowledge of what I need to do to make you better for the next one. So even if you lose the first 2, that's fine. I don't care. As long as you come out, you're healthy, you're not busted. You can, as you said, you sort of can go to work on Monday. Get that sorted. Then if they've got a couple losses under their belts, then they can go, okay, well, what am I doing wrong as an athlete that's not getting me to that next level? And so you can work together both as a coach and the athlete. Say, right, well, this is what we need to do for you to get you to that next level, but you need to do that as well. Whereas the coaches that are coming in and there's not many of them, if any. apart from, not apart from, but there might be, say, one or two who are new onto the scene and they're coming in, they're the new Greg Jackson wannabe type person, they're going to be producing the best. Their guy loses, and you'll see them around there. It's not their fault, it's the official's fault they lost. And that's where we've got to train those coaches to know that, okay, well, it wasn't the official's fault. If the official is new, they were doing the best that they could at that point in time. Didn't work out for you. That's why we have these grassroots events. So everybody's learning. The coach is learning, the fighter's learning, the official's learning.
And I see it as a promoter and coach that I see some coaches new to the scene that don't actually study the rules and know the rules. And to me, it's the analogy, if you're going to go play a game of tennis, you better know how to score a point.
Yeah. You don't know how to swing a racket.
Yeah. But if you don't know the rules of the game, you're going to put a guy in there to have a fight without knowing the rules of the game. And part of that would be an education process. And that's what the amateur scene is about.
Right, exactly. And that's why we developed the MMA rule set with the 3-tiered steps, 2 amateur tiers before you get into the pro rules. And then we broke that back down back in the days when we had enemy on the floor, and you know that one because you made it work with the cage into a lockdown. So we've actually got, you can nearly say a 3-tiered amateur system before they go into,
Pros.
So they can start off, and the beauty of that, we can take guys that have been predominantly doing, say, a striking gym, give them the opportunity to learn some grappling skills, put them into a lockdown. If they like that, great. Then we can build them up to an aftershock where they're fighting completely amateur, shin pads, gloves. They know that they've still got their striking that they can fall back on, and they might know enough just to save themselves on the ground. And that's where having the C class and B class, the absolute amateur and amateur level, I think is a fantastic setup. I don't know why other states haven't taken that on.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about it quite often that Queensland's the only state that doesn't have government sanctioning. Yet we have some of the most progressive steps to get guys ready for pro. And we run some of the best safety precautions around.
Yeah, we do. And that's without a doubt. We are the only organisation that I know of, and I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong, that requires a 7 to 14 day pre-comp examination. So that means that with that 7-day pre-comp, 7 days out from the fight, because we know that depending on what level they are, and again, we'll get to the weight cutting a bit later, but from a pro point of view, we know that in those last 7 days, that's when they're going to start their weight cutting. So we want to know what their weight is 7 days out from their weigh-in, how much weight they've lost in that period, and then one of the events used to do, so they'd weigh them in on weigh-in day, and then they'd weigh them again on fight day, how much weight they had regained. The only thing that I know internationally that's close to it is one championship with their rehydration
tests. Yep.
Right? So those sort of things. We don't have the funding or the ability to do that. But the reason why I want that 7-day pre-comp examination done is because blood tests just tell us you've got clear bloods. They don't tell us that you've got a cracked forearm from training, or that your last fight that you had 6 weeks ago you were knocked out. These are the sort of things that get overlooked. So our 7-day pre-comp rule is, have you been knocked out or rendered unconscious in the last 6 weeks, 6 months, 12 months? If so, how many times and when? Admittedly, it's only as honest as what the person wants to answer those questions, but once they go to a medical, once they go to a physician and they say to the physician, mate, I haven't been knocked out in the last 3 years, and we know, because you and I have both gone through this, we found that a fighter was rendered unconscious at training the week of the fight, So, and the week before, the week that he was doing his 7-day pre-comp. So, but he said to his doctor, no, I haven't been knocked out.
Yeah, and some of that comes back to the coach's responsibility, right? So it's the cultural thing. Hey, mate, get away with this. If you do say this, you get away. No. Your job as a coach is to look after the safety of my fighters.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big believer in, okay, have you been concussed? Right, you've got a stand down period. I have it in my gym. We have cognitive testing in the gym.
It is, mate, and nowadays there's more and more emphasis. So if we look at, and like us, when we set up MMA, we looked at all the other major sports in Australia, like rugby league, AFL, the heavy contact ones. And we were looking at what they were doing and trying to bring a bit of that measurement into the combat sport setup. So again, we were the first organisation to enforce mandatory stand-down medical suspensions. It's not an MMA AA thing. That's a medical suspension. You have concussion after your fight. You can't train for, and this is again up to the doctor, you can't train for 7, 14, 21, 30 days, whatever. That's up to the doctor's decision. No contact training in that period. With that, you can now not compete for up to 3 months. Now, the reality is most guys aren't going to be competing that often in Australia at the moment anyway. But the fact is we need them to not to fight Saturday night in a 3-round brawl, wake up Sunday morning with a headache, go to training Monday night with a headache and pass out on the mat. It has happened and we're trying to stop it.
I've got a classic in my gym. One of my coaches boxes. He's a Golden Gloves champion. He boxes for another gym, and went to a different gym for a sparring session, and got knocked out. Felt dizzy. He's gone to the hospital, and he's a smart little kid. This guy. He's gone to the hospital. They've turned around and said, "Mate, you're medically retired now. Retired, not suspended. Medically retired." He was smart enough to do the right things. That was like 3 months ago. You got dizzy the other day. So, you just sit there and go, all right, there's lots of reasons why we do the things we do. And again, it comes down to athlete safety, not my ego.
Exactly. And there's a lot of press out there waiting for something negative to happen. I mean, an example being the young gentleman who competed in Melbourne, when was that? Early this year, had a muscle condition apparently, and just because he cut too much weight leading into it as an amateur, which again, not a fan of, unfortunately passed away after his bout. But the title didn't read that. The title said MMA fighter dies after bout. So we've got to be very careful to make sure that we're protecting not just the athletes as competitors, but the sport in general, because it is still, in reality, it's still a fledgling sport, mixed martial arts, when you take into comparison against sports like boxing and Thai boxing. We've got to make sure that we're doing everything as best we can at the ground level so that as the sport grows, it's growing correctly and it's not outgrowing itself, if that makes sense. We've got to make sure that everything's put in place and that things are followed. The best group that does it locally that I know of is in New Zealand, the NZMMAS. They have a similar thing. If you get knocked out, you're suspended for 3 months. If you get knocked out 2 times within 6 months, you're suspended for 6 months. If you get knocked out again, so 3 times in that 12-month period, you can't fight for another 12 months.
Yep, and they've got a load of experience there, with Neil and Mark and all those guys.
Yeah.
And again, they don't technically have government sanctioning, but they have a body looking after it that's been supported by the government.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, like with the likes of your Mark, Terry, and Neil, the hard work that those guys are putting to build the sport up, they're protecting it. So it's doing the right things. And the people that go to NZMMAF and say, "Hi, I'm Peter Hickmott and I want to run a mixed martial arts event on this day," they go, "Okay, well, this is what you need to do for us before you can do anything. Otherwise, we're not allowing you to go ahead with it." And the good thing about it is because they're a recognised sanctioning body in New Zealand, they've got the power to shut a system down if they're not complying with the rules.
Absolutely. I dealt with Terry when we were talking about taking ACB over there, and ACB in the end just went, "No, can't comply with all that." And I went,
Yeah.
"Well, there you go, done."
Too difficult.
Yep.
It's too difficult. That's all it come down to. They didn't want to do the work to get the show on, so anyway.
Yeah, and just doing the simple things like organising ambulances and making sure all that stuff's organised. Yeah, they were prepared to do all that.
No, fair enough.
So where do you see the next step for MMA? What's the next progression for us?
Well, the next progression is for me to win the lotto so I don't have to show up to work Monday to Saturday, so that I can actually spend more time on doing my hobby and converting that into into not a business but a body that's recognised. The hardest thing for any sporting body to get recognition from as a national sporting organisation is the steps to follow to do that. So in reality, MMA Australasia at this point is a regulatory group, so that's the rules that we put in place. Remembering when we went and met with the Queensland government back in what year was that, 2011 or 2012? And we put all our paper on the table, we pushed it across and said, This is what we've got, this is what we want to do, and this is what we think the Queensland government should do. That representative that day looked at our paperwork, gave us a smile, spun it around, pushed it back in front of us and said, keep up the good work.
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting because you and I both have had to deal with the New South Wales body, the Victorian body, the South Australian body, and sometimes it's paperwork that gets in the way of what's good practices, and sometimes it's egos, and sometimes it's just too hard basket. So how does the sport get congruent throughout Australia?
It won't. No, it won't. The simple fact is, and that's where it comes down to, a federation of states that have got individual beliefs on what they think is best practice. So example being that in Victoria, for example, I've got a few of them, for amateurs, and this goes back to when the IMAF were first starting to kick in, and the gentleman down there that was trying to get it going brought in these new IMAF rules and presented them to the Victorian government. Victorian government went, yep, that's great, let's adopt those. So you have to wear shin guards and 8-ounce gloves when you compete. I don't have a problem with that. I've actually had conversations with different promoters and bodies for us to say any amateur competitor, whether it be C class or B class, must wear shin guards. That's still jury out. The only reason that is because we've got promoters saying, no, I like the rule sets that you've got, why would you change them? And I've got coaches saying, no, I like the rule sets you've got, why would you change them? Yet we've got organisations saying you need to change these rules to comply with international regulations. MMA was around before IMAF.
Yep. You and I were approached by IMAF many years ago.
So it was a battle. But in short, mate, there won't, unless there is a national body developed that every state agrees to, it won't happen. So with that, going back to that Victorian one, we've put into place for amateurs that if they miss weight, they get a point deduction or 2-point deduction, depending on what they miss by. Victoria, if you're an amateur and you miss weight, you're not fighting. So that puts a lot back onto the coach and the athlete to then go, well, now I've got to cut weight.
Yeah, and cut extra weight.
Cut extra weight. So then we get into that red zone of, okay, we've got somebody who doesn't know nutrition, who doesn't know how their body works. We've got a coach who's not experienced in it either. This guy's now got to cut an extra kilo. He's already done enough that he's feeling faint and dizzy now. If we push him that extra more, he's not going to have enough time. He's not going to have time to recover. Do we put him in the fight or not? So the dangers are there.
Yeah. And in that situation, you get the guys that are sticking bags of fluid back in without realising that it's going to say, that fluid's only going to last for 2 hours. I feel great. And then I jump back in the fight and do myself even more mischief. So with the regulatory bodies we've got in Australia, how do we compare to, say, US and the UK?
To be honest, I don't really know. I think we're on the group of the MMA as a regulatory group would be on par with a lot of those international bodies with regards to the basics being an annual medical inspection, 6 month serology exams, providing negative pregnancy tests. But then with us, like we said, that 7-day pre-comp medical, that's probably the tick box for me. From that point of view, I think we're on par with a lot of the international bodies. But in saying that, because the Queensland government doesn't have a state combat sport board, that's where the fall down is. So we still have guys rocking up from a non-MMA or not familiar with MMA requirements. Guys still rocking up with their serology test going, here, I'm ready to fight. Well, where's your medical, mate? Oh, I didn't know how to do one.
Or they didn't do their bloods, or they didn't haven't done anything.
They haven't done anything because they just thought it'd be a cool thing to nominate their guys for a cage fight, but they haven't done the research. They haven't looked back and like what we said earlier on. They don't know the rules. They don't know the regulations. They don't know the requirements. Why are you here?
Yep. And it's interesting because as a promoter, I email out to the coaches a set of rules, all the medicals, all the requirements, and give dates for it to get it all back. And a lot of it, I don't get back.
No,
Not
exactly.
until, but where is it at the weigh-ins? Where's your forms? Can I email them to you tomorrow? Well, if I don't have them tonight, you don't get them.
Yeah. And look, and it's not just that. There's like every promoter faces the same headbutt every time. So not just with lockdown and aftershock, but even with beatdown, even with proving grounds, even with eternal, they're still saying to fighters and coaches and managers 2 weeks out, you need to get your medicals in. And I'm still getting personal emails and messages on Facebook from fighters saying, can you check if my medicals are up to date? No, not my job.
Yeah.
That's your job. If you want to
Yep.
fight, you make sure your stuff's up to date.
Yeah, I tell my guys every January, do your bloods, do a medical.
Yep. Every July, do another blood.
Yep.
It's
Exactly.
no brainer. And I put that up on Facebook a number of times. If you want to be a fighter, here's the basics. Get a medical done in January, get your bloods done while you're there. That covers you medically from January to December. Like serologies can be done. I reckon they should be done a bit more regularly. I don't know. I'm just following what everybody else does. Go and get another set of done at June 30 or July 1.
Yep. That's exactly what I tell my guys.
But the problem that we've got there, mate, is that a lot of, and again, it comes down to the education of the coaches, that they don't know if they're going to get their guy or their girl a match. So they leave it right to the death. Yeah, I've got them a match. A week out, I better go and get my bloods down. Now, the problem we've got with that is that when these guys have already started changing their diet, if they go and get their serologies done, and I've seen it, they're fighting on Saturday, weigh-ins Friday, serologies done Wednesday, there's irregularities in the blood. The doctor says, mate, you can't fight. These levels are out of whack. What am I going to do when you're not fighting? I've had that happen numerous times where their doctor that they've gone to for the serology has said, you can't fight because your blood levels have come back irregular.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
but if you do them as a standard, bang, bang, done for the year. Yep. Good.
No brainer. Anyway, that's just me.
Yep.
I might be thinking different.
Yeah. And education-wise, like I got you in to do a course for my fighters, so my fighters knew the rules. And I find it frustrating that as a coach and promoter, well, mainly the promoter side of it, that the coaches and athletes don't know what the rule sets are. They think they do, but they don't. And they don't know how it's being judged. So do you think there's an educational process that we need to pump up for the coaches and that?
Absolutely.
And years ago, we talked about doing certificates to, here's a registered club or blah, blah, blah. But everyone jumps up and down about it's going to cost too much and all that sort of stuff. But the coaches aren't picking up the phone and saying, hey, Pete, what are the rules? Show me the rules. How do you judge it? Or getting you out to do a course on how to do it all.
But and we run the courses probably not regularly enough because when the season gets going, it's just flat out. So to give you an example, just so far this year, like January and February, there was not a lot happening. But first weekend in March, I was in Melbourne with Hex. The second weekend I had off. The third weekend, we had Beatdown and Eternal on the same night. The following weekend, I was in Launceston for the Legion Amateur Comp. The weekend after that, I was in Cairns for Explosion Fight Night. And then last weekend, we were down at Proving Grounds. Sorry, no, we had Warwick first, Gross Run at Warwick, and then Proving Grounds. So that's, for me, what's that, 7 shows in 7 weeks. But that's just with MMA.
I remember back in the day, we did, I think it was 46 events in a year. And there's only 52 weeks. You're sitting there going, well, when do we get time off? Well,
exactly. You don't. And that's probably a reason why a lot of people don't want to get too involved with it. But you look at that from a coaching point of view. If you've got guys that are doing amateur boxing, amateur kickboxing, amateur MMA, sometimes there's those fight shows are on the same night, and you've got to decide who's going where.
Yep. Well, I have the issue, because my guys do. Besides submission grappling, they're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions. And then I've got guys that box, kickbox, and MMA. I have to have corners that can go that aren't me because sometimes I'm not available.
Yeah, exactly. It gets busy, and that's good. In the main sense of everything, having a lot of activity is a good thing because, like we said, if someone's being an MMA fighter at an amateur level, they might fight 1, 2, maybe 3 times a year at max. Very few guys are fighting any more than that. Even at a professional level, some of them are fighting maybe twice a year if they can. And let's face it, at a pro level locally on the local scene, you're not making the money that the boys are making internationally. So the commitment that those guys are putting in and the sacrifices they're making for the couple $1,000 they might get, you've got to be really dedicated to the sport. And then when you look at
what's a UFC contract?
Side, yeah,
UFC contract starts 10 and 10 or something. So
if you're lucky,
yeah.
I think before that it was like 5 and 5, and then if you've got a knockout bonus, you got the 50. But then when you turn that to an officiating point of view, we don't make that much money.
Oh no, we're doing it for the love of the sport. That's for sure.
Yeah, covers fuel, and that's about it.
Yeah. So, without naming names, what's the most interesting thing that's happened to you in the cage?
got tripped. It was at an Eternal. There was two big, tall, either welterweights or middleweights, and I was reffing. And I'm trying to get out of the road of one of them, and he stepped back and stepped on my toe. Now, I know it sounds silly, but as I'm moving around, I heard the 10-second marker go. He stepped on my toe. I've gone flat on my back. Thankfully, the cameras weren't watching. Perfect backward roll, back up into position. Horn's gone, stop the fight. And all I heard was the whole crowd was just erupting behind me in laughter and applause because the referee went ass up, but he managed to keep going and get into the fight. That's probably the most interesting. Like there's, I think when I first started refereeing, it was Gordon Graff was fighting Damon McClure at one of the Warriors Realms at Southport RSL. And thankfully, he rang me and he said, "Oh, Pete, look, I had you down to fight this guy, but I might not. I'll get this other bloke in. Can you come down and referee?" I said, "Yeah, right." So I did that. I'm thankful because he had him penned up against Gordon Graff. So it's just a blessing in disguise, that one. And so actually, Gordon's taken Damon down, or Damon's taken Gordon, because Damon was a BJJ guy and Gordon was just a gorilla. He just roared through things. He just tore things apart. And there's another one with Gordon and Appy Camara. But anyway, he's sitting inside Gordon's guard and just hammer fisting down, just really giving him a good thumping. And I'm looking at Damon saying, fight back. And Damon's doing the right thing. But I looked, and his bottom row of teeth, his four teeth had disappeared. That's not good. Then he's looked up again and they're back there. I thought, okay, no, I must see something. So this is all happening. And again, this is all happening in like this time frame. And then I looked again and his teeth are gone, and I stopped the fight. And Damon said, "What'd you stop it for?" I said, "Mate, I think you've lost your teeth." He said, "Oh, no, I haven't." Gordon had actually broken his teeth off in his gum. Damon's full front teeth on his bottom jaw, bottom teeth had broken off inside his gum. He didn't hang around for the decision. He was gone. So the other one I've refereed, which was a bit funny, was Gordon again against Appy Camara on one of the explosion shows for down the Gold Coast. It was like a hybrid event. So the first round was going to be boxing, second round kickboxing, third round was MMA. Gordon and Appy, Samoan versus Kiwi. Like there wasn't hatred between them, but there's tension, and I'm in the middle of them. This thing was never getting out of the first round. And anyway, they're looking at each other, and they're really some intense stares going across the ring, and I was giving them their rules. Yep, you're good. Yep, touch the gloves. Away they went. And they stood on each other's front foot and were just throwing bombs. I mean, like these things were heavy, and all you could hear was the hit one to be bang, and one of them go, "Come on," and then bang, and throw it again. And then this is in a boxing fight with 4-ounce gloves. They stood on each other's front toes and just started throwing. So they just ducked their heads down, and away they went. I'm standing probably not across the other side of the ring, but I wish I was. Gordon has hit Uppy with an uppercut, so it was a right uppercut and then a right straight, and put Uppy through the second rope, out cold, and was following him. Stop, come back. And anyway, after that, they just sort of stood up, had a bit of a giggle, and once Appy regained consciousness, had a bit of a giggle, and away they went. So if there's some bangers that happen, guys getting knocked out, sort of semi-unconscious, and you're stopping the fight, then they're trying to continue the fight with you while you're there. I had that with Alan Potter in his UFC debut in Melbourne. I can't remember who he fought, but he's still fighting this young guy. He's a really nice American guy that he fought. Anyway, he basically just knocked Callan out. And I've not actually seen anybody standing up, unconscious, eyes rolled back. And I'm trying to hold him up against the cage saying, "Cal, wake up, Cal, wake up." Fight's over. And he was still trying to fight, unconscious, eyes rolled back in his head. And I just said to him, "Cal, wake up." So he went, "What happened?" Yeah, okay. As soon as you hear that, what happened? You know it's right.
So what advice would you give someone looking to get in to being an MMA official?
Honestly, don't do it. Contrary, do it. But to do it, go through the right passages. So depending on where you are and whatever state you're in or country, find the right passages, find the right people to talk to, get your experience, get your knowledge, and then put yourself out there. So like what we say with our guys, just because you come and do the Peter Hickmott course on how to be an MMA referee doesn't automatically mean that tomorrow you're getting a phone call from the UFC or an email from the UFC to say, "Well, mate, we need you in Las Vegas in 3 weeks. Can you be there?" You've got to go out and do your time. There's a lot of very, very good referees out there that will never see the UFC mat, which is really disappointing.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of good refs in Australia, and I've named a few of them already that unfortunately won't get there.
Yep.
I guess.
It's interesting because like we've had conversations with Mark Goddard and we've had conversations with Herb Dean and Big John McCarthy and all the rest of it.
Mark Ratner.
Mark Ratner.
You
Yeah,
can't
we've
get
had.
any higher than that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that the level of expectations for the UFC is so much higher than people expect it to be, and the fact that as a referee, sorry, as a judge, you're expected to quantify why you made a decision.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, like the UFC and the other events we worked for, ACB, make sure that you have notes there at that pro level for every fight that you've judged, every round that you judged, and why you judged it that way. So they make sure, and they want to make sure that you know what you're talking about and you can back up your decision. That's the key thing, but that goes back to what I was getting at before with experience. You've got to be able to do it. I tell my guys when they've done the course, if they're going to go and watch UFC on TV, do themselves a favour and sit there and judge it. Call it how they see it. I mean, and I still do it. Like on the weekend with Volk's fight, I had it 49-46. Two other judges there had it 49-46. So like when you're doing that and you're doing it consistently, you're pretty confident you can say that you're going to get it right. I mean, like when we look at Australia's involvement in the UFC and the officials that we've got, there's not that many that have been there. So if we say Steve Percival, John Sharp, who I think is the best ref in Australia, if not, top 5 in the world. Myself, Cameron Quinn had the ref in Brisbane. Greg Klenians, Jim Purdius, and Matt from UA, Matt Wynn. Like that's 7 referees that we've had in Australia in the UFC.
Yeah, and our step into the UFC as referees has really only started with Steve back at 110, sort of almost.
Yeah, and look, and as much I do have a lot of respect for Steve. He's done a lot for the sport. I think and because Steve was the only Australian person that I know that actually went overseas and did John McCarthy's course, and that went back to his association with Luke Pizzuti when they were doing CFC. And Luke and Anthony Perosh's and Elvis Sinisic's connection that way. They said, we're going to be doing a cage fighting championship here in Australia. Steve, do you want to be the referee? Okay, I better go and do something about it. So Steve refereed 1 or 2 events and then went, no, I need to know more about this. Jumped on a plane, went over and did John's course.
Put his money where his mouth is and went and learned.
Yep, and make credit to him. He's done it. So guys like himself and, like I said, Sharpie, I've learned a lot from those blokes, how they hold themselves in the cage, how they operate. And then obviously looking at other refs like obviously Mark Goddard now being probably one of the premier refs in the world. Herb, Jason Herzog, worked with those guys. Like if you're wanting to become a referee, you've got to watch what the other refs are doing. And I've always said the best officials and the best referees are the ones you don't see. And like I was saying earlier on, when we look at things like rugby league, rugby union, AFL, the best referees in a rugby league game is the one that doesn't blow the whistle, but lets the game run.
Yep.
So
he's in control of the game and still lets it happen.
Correct.
And is not blowing the whistle every.
Yeah, every time he opens his mouth, it's like he swallowed the whistle. So you don't want to be that referee that's, like I said, consistently bad all the time. And I've had to do it. I've had some refs come through say, yep, I want to be a rep. And they make some really poor mistakes, not just once, 2, 3 times. And you've just got to say, look, mate, I can't have you referee. You need to go back to this level and do it. And if they don't do it, then sorry, I can't have you on the team. You can go and be a cage marshal. And they still don't do that.
That's the hard part, out the back with the gloves and all the rest of it and checking around.
And that's our process, mate. Like if anybody wants to know what we do with MMA, like at the elite level, so examples like the beatdowns and Eternals, we've got a big team that goes there now. So, and when I say big, it's probably a group of maybe 10 or 12. So with that I've got primarily 3 to 4 referees. I'll have 3 or 4 key core judges, and then I'll have a couple of people that are starting to judge, but then their main job that night will be the cage marshal. And on top of that, we'll have 2 cut men and hopefully 2 doctors. So that's the team that we organise and we put together. That's what we go to the professional shows like the Eternals, because that's the expectation they want, because we know and we can see from now the stepping stone out of Eternal is straight to UFC. We've got how many guys are going from that are on the roster now that are going over to road to UFC.
And you've got all the ones going from Hex as well. So yeah.
And that's the thing too, like is those 2 shows being the premier gigs in Australia, the fighters are aspiring to get onto there. It's up to And I suppose I'm lucky here in Queensland that we don't have, both lucky and unlucky. One, that we don't have a commission that the promoter needs to report to, but they know that they can rely on MMA Australasia to bring a professional team there that's going to do all the jobs that's required. Whereas, example, with Hex in Melbourne, the problem they've got there is with the Combat Sport Commission down there is that when we go to Hex, we'll have 3 refs, 2 judges. So one of those refs needs to judge. There's no corner marshals, there's no cut men, there's no one out the back controlling what's happening. So those guys, when they go, if they've only ever competed on Hex, when they do get the call up to the UFC, when they get there, this is like, wow, this is unexpected. I didn't know what was going on here. Whereas the teams that have come through the eternal process with MMAO, they know the expectations when they get to UFC because they're familiar with the process.
Well, it's interesting because like we run the same process as you do on the big shows, on the little shows, and fighters just get used to that's what happens. And that's exactly what you're after. You're after that smooth transition that, okay, I'm going to get my hands wrapped and then someone's going to check them off. And then so I'm going to get my gloves and they're going to get checked off. And then I'm going to be checked by the doctor after. And I'm going to, yeah.
But there's a correct process there, and you're right. The guys are at that point when they do start moving through the levels and the progression into the top ranks, even if they don't get to UFC level, let's say they might be fighting on an aftershock and then they get to XFC or a proving grounds and they might get to an Eternal or a beatdown. If that's as far as they're going to go, that's fine. They've done everything that they can do to give themselves the best opportunity. They've had fun. But all the way through it, the process has been the same. So they're familiar with what's required. And it's really interesting when I do get the opportunity to go and officiate at non-MMA events or non-MMA events. So if it's say a Thai boxing show or an interstate show, and I see teams there that are familiar with my process, and they look around and they go, "Where's this thing? Where's this thing? How come this is happening? Why isn't it? What's the problem? Why can't I find anything?" Those processes aren't in place. So that's the problem at that point.
It's taken time to get those processes into people. It's not been a overnight, here we go, this is what we're going to do. No, there was kickback. Oh, don't do that. Don't do this. Over time, we got the processes through that make it run smoothly, make it safe for everybody.
Yep.
So,
and to be honest, that's been a process of like nearly 15 years that we've been looking at it going, okay, we need to make that better.
Yep.
And we need to improve this point. But the other point of that too is that, and this is where having a government body in place is that the government body will say, right, well, the person in that position is going to be remunerated X amount of dollars for that position there. I remember when I first started refereeing, I would drive from Toowoomba to the Gold Coast on a Friday night to do the weigh-ins, drive back because I had to work on Saturday, drive back to the Gold Coast, referee the fight that night, get paid 100, maybe $150, and then turn around and drive back because the promoter didn't want to put me up in accommodation. You know, I've had some promoters where I've had 15 fights, they didn't want to pay for 2 referees. So I've refereed 15 plus fights in one night. You know, it's now that it's becoming the norm, I can say to those promotions now, okay, your event is only an amateur and you only got 10 fights. I'm going to bring 2 refs, 3 judges, a timekeeper. But the 2 refs, we know that at that point, one of the refs will be a timekeeper. I'm conscious that there's outlays and expenses that those organisations need to put out before they get the show going. I'm fully conscious of that. But at the same time, we're not a charity. You know, I've got guys that,
and especially now, and especially these guys now that have developed the skills.
Yeah. You know, so they've got to be remunerated for the efforts and the time that they put in. And it's not a lot. Like I said, judges get $150, refs get $250. Like, show me somebody who'll do that.
Oh, back not so long ago, fighters got turned pro for $150. With all the time you've had in the octagon and ring and the rest of it, what has it taught you about human behavior, courage and fear and all the rest of that sort of stuff? I've listened to your talk. I've listened to your talk many times out the back of fight shows where you go, well, you're about to get punched in the face. If you don't like it, it's too late.
Too late to turn around now, but some of them take that opportunity, don't they? They go and do the pre-fight briefing, they check in, they get their gloves, and where's old mate? Yeah, where's his bags? He's gone.
Yep.
Takes wouldn't say special, takes a unique person to build the courage enough to put themselves into a known conflict situation where there's the possibility of the outcome isn't going to go their way. And what I mean by that is There's only 3 people in that combat arena, competition area. One of them's your friend, the other one's not. So the friend being the referee, the not friend being your opposition. Now, and I say this all the time, whenever anybody steps into that ring, cage, whatever, they've got a 50-50 chance of winning. All right? Doesn't matter who they are. You know, you got the Steve Bradbury type people. So for me, you learn about the emotions that people will have at both extremities, the highs and the lows, the highs of victory, the lows of losing. Some people have got the will and the courage to continue to a point where I've got to be the one that says you've had enough. Some people know that they've taken on more than they can handle and they'll submit early. They'll tap, so they'll get mounted and their opponents are just about to unload a bomb and you'll hear the I'm out, I'm done. You know, the fear factor comes in. So you've got that fight or flight scenario, but you're like right in that fight. So for me, learning about human behavior in that point is that if they've dialed in on their emotions and how to control them, it's a very, very interesting human. They can control their emotions. They can put themselves through pain that most people wouldn't take. Just on the weekend after Proving Grounds, there was one of the young fellas that it was his first amateur fight. He lost. He put up a good fight, great fight. And this is the worst thing ever. Half the time I can never remember these kids' names. But I went down to go and do my pre-fight chat with one of the other fighters, and this poor kid was in absolutely beside himself. His teammates are hovering around saying, "Mate, it's okay, it's okay." And I went through and I said, "You're right." And he was just crying and bawling into his towel. I said, "Mate, what's wrong? What are you crying for?" "Oh, I really wanted to win it." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I know. But so did the other guy." I said, "You've got the right to be disappointed with yourself. You've got the right to be upset, but don't think that you didn't put in enough effort." I said, "It just wasn't your night tonight." I said, "And that's not to say that the next night's not going to be." I said to him, "This is good that you're like this because it meant something to you." And he sort of stopped crying for a bit once that sunk in. He went, "Well, yeah, it did." I said, "Well, mate, embrace that."
Yeah, interesting enough, I had a conversation with Eric Nixick about the same sort of thing, and he was saying that sometimes the best guy on the night didn't win because the chaos creates the option or the issue that's going to happen that's going to lose you the fight. And you can do everything you possibly can to win the fight and then not.
Exactly.
And we've got to, as fighters, we've got to deal with all that sort of stuff. And as coaches, we have to deal with that. And it's a hard thing to learn to deal with.
And that's it. And that's probably from a coaching point of view where I wouldn't say I don't miss coaching. I sort of do. But from a coaching point of view, there's only so much you can do for that athlete. Each athlete, as you know, and everybody that coaches know, is slightly different to the other. So they're tuned differently. So you've got to change the way you coach that fighter, and then you've got to change it to coach that one. So you've got to make the adjustments as a coach to them, but you can only do so much. You can't fight the fight for them. You hear the coach's side, 1-2, I need you to do the 1-2. And then you hear the coaches saying, "Why aren't you listening to me?" And they're really yelling at them. And that's probably not the good thing, but that coach, I guess, at that point for me, hasn't tuned themselves to the fighter. It's not the fighter tuning himself to the coach. Coach needs to tune himself to the fighter. So from that point of view, you see the coaches when they come in between round breaks and they're throwing out 1,000 advices. This is what I want you to do. This is what you're going to do. That guy in their first fight, and I say it all the time, is that adrenaline's going to kick in. It's like you're going to have muffs over your ears. Someone's put a set of goggles on you. Your pupils are going to shrink. Your guys are going to become like weights, and you can't breathe.
Yep.
That's adrenaline. That's what's going to control it.
As a coach, when I corner, I only have a couple of things to say during the round break, and it's breathe, game plan A is working, or game plan A is not working, go to game plan B. That's about it, because left, right, left, they're not going to remember that 10 seconds later.
No. And I say mine was probably less than that. When I got in there, yes, breathe, give me another breath, one more, get them to breathe three big deep breaths. Right. How you feeling? and you get the fighter to tell you what they're saying. That way, you know that they're actually tuned into the fight. Okay, well, this is what you're doing good. Keep doing that. And then if you're looking at what the opponent's doing, you need to be careful when he does this because, admittedly, you've got 1 minute. Take out 10 seconds for seconds down. Take out 5 seconds to get in and out of the cage. So you've got 45 seconds, 40 seconds at max to get information to and from each other. But for mine, it was just quite simple. How you feeling? Feel okay? Yep. Yeah, he's feeling pretty strong. Yeah, he is. He looks strong. Right, so with that, make sure you keep the distance. Don't engage. Okay. And that way you can start doing that. Anyway, that's enough about coaching. I shouldn't be coaching anybody. My coaching record was better than my fight record, that's for sure.
All right. So, toughest fighter to referee.
Toughest fighter to referee. As in hard to ref, that they didn't listen to me, or
Probably the toughest fighter, really, then.
Damien Brown.
Ian Brown?
The guy just has no quit. He does not know when to quit. Actually, well, I won't say, let's put a few of them out there. Let's go Damien when Gokhan was fighting, Turklemies. Probably a couple others that I could think of, but those three come to mind.
It's interesting because they're all three military people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. And that's the crazy thing about it. They just didn't know quit. There was no quit in them. They were the guys that, they were ready to go on the sword. And I keep saying to them nowadays, and there's a team comes out of Sydney, they say, mate, you know what we're like? We're prepared to die in there. Well, it's my job to make sure you don't. Plus, if you do, there's a shitload of paperwork I've got to fill out. So let's try not to have that happen, eh? But those are the guys, and Ian's probably one that does a lot of it, and Damien as well, on their social media pages where they've got photos up of them and they're just showered in their own blood from lacerations, but they're still there. That's the type of person, and interesting enough, both of those guys were very challenging to referee because they were so dialed in. But when you see how they both react now as coaches and mentors, how they get their message across to them now is completely different to the way that they were putting the message across when they were competing. And I mean that was the absolute most respect. Like those guys, when they were competing, it was, you're in my road and I'm going through you. Whereas now as a coach, they're changing the mindset of how their fighter responds.
They're both very interesting coaches, and they have obviously studied coaching further than their fighting career.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
It's fantastic to see. Most respectful fighter.
I'd say they all are now. I don't have any fighter that gives me any grief, and none of our team does. I can see a lot now where, like, remember when MMA first came out and there was traditional martial artists and they were all about the bows and, the worshipping and that sort of stuff. And then there came that little bit of thuggery into it where, it didn't matter who you were just in my road and you were a pest. And so there was no respect. But now I can see that it's gone full circle again where there's a lot of respect from the fighters and the teams toward everybody. There's very little, every now and then there's a little bit of animosity between the two competitors. But I think all the fighters these days show a very good amount of respect and sportsmanship. And I thank the coaches and the teams for doing that. There are some teams that obviously have put themselves in the crosshairs for actions that they've done and whatnot previously, but they're still trying to get out of it. But even again, those guys, when they compete, they're respectful. Look, I don't think I could put a halo across any one fighter because they all come up and say, mate, thanks for reffing and thanks for looking after me.
And that's what we want. We want that because that's adding to the sport in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, like when you see guys like that and you've followed them from their amateur league right through to their pro setup. So example would be Jack Jenkins, a kid that we reffed when he's in amateurs, got to the pros, now he's in the UFC. Right? So those sort of guys. Still, Madalena, like same thing. Local pro, now he's in the big league.
And it's interesting to see that Australia's slowly built the number of fighters using the stepping stones that we've got, and now we're getting more people into the UFC than we've ever had before.
Correct. And that's the key thing, mate, is that they're following the process. It's taken us, best part of 20 years to get that process in place and for them to go, hey, maybe I need to do this. Very few athletes are hitting that level now that, they're maybe 2-0 as an amateur and then 3-0 as a pro. So they've only had 5 bouts all up. Tom Nolan's a perfect example. The kid that went through all of the amateur ranks, went through all the submission wrestling ranks, got his experience, got his numbers up, got his confidence about his ability, and then he went and found the team that was going to fit him and help him the most, and he's doing it. Like, he's there now. So that's a kid from a local that's gone through all of the amateurs, and now he's at the big league. If there's anyone, I suppose if you're going to say, who would you recommend as doing the paths, that would be one guy. But then when you pull it back to people like, who else did we have in the amateur ranks that went through? Pauline Awara. Those guys went through the Smasher series. Those are the kids that went through our amateur ranks, went through the MMA grading system and got the experience, and boom, they're in the UFC. So those sort of people there that follow the process and trust the process, they're the ones that will be successful.
Yep. All right. Last question. Craziest crowd you've ever had to experience in an MMA fight?
A lot of them. Townsville crowds are nuts. I think probably locally on a local domestic stand, I'd say the Townsville crowd get right into it. They enjoy it up there. We all know the Mansfield Tavern has just wild crowds there, like from the early days of dragging guys off the cage that were climbing out onto it to, again, getting the process in place where we can separate the crowd from the competitors. They're good. It always sticks in my mind many years ago when, again, I'll keep going back to Warriors Realm, but I had a lot of good experiences with Shane. We went out to Moranbah, central Queensland, middle of nowhere, mining town, put the cage out there. First fight of the night, and I'll have to look it up, was a Kiwi guy. And so we're in the local, I think it might have been even the school gymnasium where he had the event. Kiwi guy comes out, and there's, of course, a heap of Kiwi boys out there. They break out in a haka. That just put shivers right up and down my spine because it was in this tin shed, and there might have been maybe 20 of them. Sounded like there was 2,000 of them, just roaring. Other crazy crowds, UFC in Perth, because the time frame starting over there, like I'm sure some of the blokes go from the pubs straight to the kebab shop, straight to the arena, because they're starting over there at like 7 a.m. in the morning, or even early.
Been
So
out on a drink all night long.
Out on the drink all night long, and then just back it up and go again. So yeah, they're
I remember
on the drink at.
Yeah, I remember the
7
crowd
o'clock.
here in Brisbane for the first UFC here with Mark Hunt versus Bigfoot. That was crazy noise.
Yeah. I've got videos on my phone of when Jack Della Maddalena fought in Perth for the first time, and also when Volk fought over here against Islam, of Bruce trying to introduce the crowd. So on TV you hear it because he's got the microphone. You only hear a bit of the crowd at the background, but when you're in the arena and the crowd is roaring that much, Bruce Buffer's voice just disappears.
Yep, and
Like,
he's got a big voice.
He's got a big voice, and like they're trying to dial the speakers up, and the crowd's just drowning him out from the cheers and whatnot. Other one was in Korea, Busan. I refereed Superboy against Charles Jourdain, and Superboy was supposed to win that fight. Not that night. Goes back to, chaos creates the opportunity. Jourdain dropped him with an uppercut and a hook, and I was reffing and I stopped it. So 16,000 Koreans, you could have heard a pin drop. And there's me in the middle of it going, what the fuck did I just do? But again, chaos creates opportunity. Opportunity creates better opportunities.
Yeah, and losing's a byproduct of competition, and we're in the competition game.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, you've got a 50-50 chance when you're in there. I mean, crowd-wise, every crowd's just as good. But yeah, locally, Mansfield Tavern always pours it on because it's such a tight-lit little
small space,
arena.
And it's chockers.
Yeah, it's your standing room only and you're flat out breathing. Yeah, they're probably the fun ones.
Cool. All right. Thanks for jumping on.
Mate, not a drama. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to It's Not About the Fight. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and keep up the hard work on and off the mat. Stay tuned for my next chat with another top coach or athlete.